President Trump's nominee to be Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, was grilled on Capitol Hill yesterday in his confirmation hearing, and the biggest fireworks were acclaimed by his detractors that said he's not qualified for this position. Okay, I have a bit of an issue with that. So what I want to do is just look at the current Secretary of Defense and Pete Hegseth and take a look at the on paper qualifications for the two, but then contrast that with what was actually done, especially in Austin's case, and what Hegseth is claiming he's going to do here. And then let's see who is actually the better qualified candidate. Now, let's look first of all at the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. On paper, he's got everything that you can imagine. He was a corps commander, was a division commander, was in charge of large numbers of troops. He's on the board of a bunch of defense contracting firms. And so he's the standard bearer. This is what all of these guys typically have. You know, maybe it was a senator, it was a general. Now, is that really what we need, though? Just imagine, I'm going to show you something that Secretary of Defense Austin said at the very first of his tenure, after the disaster of the Afghanistan withdrawal. And as you know, I've talked many times, I was all for withdrawing from Afghanistan, but the way it was done was hideous and absolutely botched unnecessarily. It should have been done so much better. But in the aftermath of that, Secretary Austin went on to talk about why some of the things he had failed. Now, as you listen to this clip here, now just imagine if this had been Pete Hegseth, without the Raytheons, without the being a general in charge of a corps and all that kind of stuff. If he didn't have that resume, if he had said this, imagine how he would be excoriated. But this is the guy that does have the reputation, said this.
The fact that the Afghan army that we and our partners trained simply melted away, in many cases without firing a shot, took us all by surprise, and it would be dishonest to claim otherwise. We need to consider some uncomfortable truths. That we didn't fully comprehend the depth of corruption and poor leadership in the senior ranks. That we didn't grasp the damaging effect of frequent and unexplained rotations by President Ghani of his commanders. That we didn't anticipate the snowball effect caused by the deals that the Taliban commanders struck with local leaders in the wake of the Doha Agreement, and that the Doha Agreement itself had a demoralizing effect on Afghan soldiers. And finally, that we failed to grasp that there was only so much for which and for whom many of the Afghan forces would fight.
That is absolutely astounding. He said on there that he was surprised that the ANSF melted away, the Afghan security forces. That took us by surprise. And I'm thinking, how in God's name could anyone have been taken by surprise? In my last combat deployment there in 2011 or 2010, 2011, I came back out in early 2012 and I published a long, detailed report that said that our senior leaders were lying to us, that they kept telling us things were getting better when they weren't. And then I just detailed exactly what the problem was. Some of the things that I specifically put in that public report were that the ANSF were terrible. They were poorly trained, and that they were making deals with the Taliban. The Taliban was making deals with the Afghan security forces in the areas where the combat was taking place. I mean, it was just awful. I publicly said all that stuff. And now here is the Secretary of Defense with all of these qualifications saying, gosh, who could have known? Well, anyone who read my report would have known, or just anyone who was willing to look at the facts on the ground would have known, because anyone who genuinely looked at the situation would have known that. Then he said we didn't fully comprehend the depth of the corruption of the poor Afghan leadership. That's even a more egregious lie. Everybody knew about the corruption. I mean, my gosh, it was in the Washington Post, New York Times daily, and all kinds of other newspapers and television reports. It was classic. It was legendary how corrupt the Afghan government was. It was all over the place. And yet here is the Secretary of Defense claiming he didn't know. And he said, we have to be honest. That worries me. Either he was just lying through his teeth, saying he was going to be honest, or he was honest and he said those things. It didn't make any sense. He also said that they didn't understand how changing leaders, combat leaders, would be a problem. I mean, have you ever served in the military? If all you did is work at, I don't know, Walgreens or something, or as a clerk at a grocery store, maybe you wouldn't understand why it was a big deal. But you're supposed to have been, according to your resume, corps commander, a division commander, a company commander, battalion. You're supposed to have commanded at every level. Nobody should have known better than you how that's going to cause deleterious effects in combat. And yet there you are telling everybody that you don't know anything about this. Then he also said that, well, he talks about he didn't know that there would be deals struck between the Afghan security forces and the Taliban. Again, you have to have been oblivious to that. Didn't know that the Doha agreement would cause a demoralizing effect on the Afghan soldiers. So you're going to try and tell me, Mr. Secretary of Defense, that you didn't realize that when after 20 years of support, that now then we say, all right, we're heading out and it's going to be on your own. And they had absolutely become dependent on us and relied almost like an IV feed for just daily operations, that having us leave is not going to make them afraid or worried or something. I mean, you can't say any of that and have a straight face. And so I ask you, if that was Pete Hegseth had delivered a verbatim that speech in that situation with the resume that he is going to bring into the Secretary of Defense position, he would have been just cooked on live television. He would have been excoriated on all the television shows that, oh my gosh, see, this proves it. His judgment is terrible because he doesn't know, because he didn't run a big organization. He didn't do this, he didn't do that. And how could he not know these things? That's what they would have said. But no one said any of those things because the establishment loves these kind of guys. Because what he did do, he very faithfully kept the gravy train running, and his performance throughout this entire 3 years of the Russia-Ukraine war really puts a fine tooth on that, or puts a very clarity on that, makes it so obvious that he's really good at the establishment deal of putting forth all of the money, making sure we get contracts, etc. And if you need any proof of that, let's just take a look at a little bit of the bidding here. So at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war in February 2022, Austin led this big group of 50 nations. He's bragged about this incessantly at the Ramstein meeting they call this in Germany. It's an U.S. air base in Germany, where he assembled these people 24 times. Most recently, just finished the 24th. And during that time, he talked about how we're going to give you everything you need to fight this war. It turned out to be thousands of armored vehicles of various types, artillery pieces, air defense weapons, millions of rounds of artillery, thousands of rockets, tens of millions of regular ammunition for firing weapons of various calibers. All these things just kept on going. He also said over and over that they had a chance to win. He said in, I believe it was April of 2022, Austin did, that our objective, American objective, is, of course, to help Ukraine, but it's to weaken Russia. That's what the Secretary of Defense said was the objective of the U.S. And so all these actions were supposed to feed into that, the accomplishment of that objective. That's what he said. And that's what all of his experience, classic experience, was supposed to enable him to be able to do. But then what it didn't do is that in 2022, November 2022, when his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, told the world publicly that, hey, you know what? If you want to make a negotiated settlement and keep what you got, this is the time to do it. Because Milley recognized that the Russians had been weakened because of what happened in Kherson Oblast and Kharkiv Oblast. But they still are Russia. They still have 140 million people. They still have the defense industrial base. They still have everything they need to recover from that loss, move on. And he knew that the Ukraine side didn't. But his Secretary of Defense apparently didn't know. So here's this guy ignoring his number one highest ranking military officer in the U.S. Armed Forces. He ignored him and kept going. Then what happened? What did that lead to? 2023, that he provided all this ammunition, all this weapons, said we're going to give them everything they need to succeed, and they utterly failed. Then throughout the entire year of 2024, it's nothing but methodically being moved backwards to the west for the Ukraine side, despite everything we're doing in there. And then it's just hard to believe. But when Gary first showed me this clip that I'm about to show you, I thought that it was actually something from 2022. But when you find out that it's actually from October 2024, and in light of everything I just told you about how it's self-evidently graphically failing on the battlefield, Lloyd Austin has plunged this.
In terms of their ability to win, the first step in winning is believing that you can win. And so they believe that we can win. We believe that they can win if they have the right equipment, the right support. And we're going to do everything we can continue to do everything we can to ensure that that gets there.
But here's the thing: even if that had been said in 2022, that anyone who knows what they're talking about would have known how absurd that is. They don't have everything that they need. They don't have the personnel to have it. Russia has the personnel. Russia has the defense industrial base, etc. They got all of that stuff. But the Ukraine side didn't, and he should have known. And if Pete Hegseth had said that in that situation, he would have just been torn apart. People would have said, absolutely not. The guy doesn't know what he's talking about because he doesn't have the experience. He doesn't know. He was never a general. He never built a company like Raytheon or something like that. He doesn't know anything. But instead, this guy met all that criteria, and that's still as bad as he was. And then here he is just a week or so ago at the end of all this, instead of recognizing and even putting a caveat that, well, I mean, it didn't work out as well as we'd hoped. No, here's what he's saying at the very end.
If Putin swallows Ukraine, his appetite will only grow. If tyrants learn that aggression pays, we will only invite even more aggression, chaos, and war. But we are still determined to not let that happen. Retreat will only provide incentives for more imperial aggression. And if we flinch, you can count on Putin to push further and punch harder. Ukraine's survival is on the line. But so is the security of Europe, the United States, and the world.
That is insanely bad assessment level of stuff. To suggest all those things are true when they self-evidently are not true. The security of the entire West is not at risk here. There is no, Russia doesn't want the entire West. They may want up to the Dnieper River in Ukraine, but who knows? Maybe there'll be something negotiated short of that. But to suggest that the whole Western world is at risk by this is crazy. And then to suggest that, well, even now, we can't let Russia win. Ukraine has to win. Everything you've done for 3 years has failed to accomplish that. And on what possible rationale, what kind of mentality would be able to undergird that to say that with a straight face that, but if as long as Trump doesn't mess it up, there's a chance to win. There is no chance to win. And yet this, folks, this is what is done by those with the alleged resumes to be Secretary of Defense. And we could go all the way back through several, last 7 or 8, the last few I worked for. They were look great on paper. Many of them had come from the defense industry, so they had ticked the checkbox on working for a large organization. Some had been senators, some had been generals themselves. You had James Mattis, another general in the first Trump term, actually resigned because Trump had the temerity to say he wanted to withdraw from Syria. I mean, that's what he actually said, because the president is going to withdraw from Syria, something that has nothing to do with American national security. He resigned from his office. Now, of course, there was a number of things that led up to that, but there's a casus belli for him to resign. What judgment does it say that a guy who's supposed to know how combat works and how balance of power in the region works doesn't understand that there's nothing associated with American national security there, and actually left because of it? So he did a disservice. So again, everybody that's read about it, you get into the things like the future combat systems, which I was a part of in Fort Bliss, Texas, in the early 2000s. You had Secretary Gates at the time. Later on, I forget the guy who followed him up. But these guys, look, they did nothing. The Secretary of Defense is one of his primary jobs is to modernize the force and to make sure that the capabilities that we have match the potential threats that are out there. And I watched from the inside how these guys apparently had no idea what they were doing. And so they did nothing. So instead of the future combat systems providing something, we spent about $20 billion and got squat for it. Nothing. It completely, totally failed. Then they had a new modernization program after that, the ground combat vehicle, I think it was called. That got canceled. Never produced even an operational prototype. And there's 2 or 3 after that. And to this day, we still have the M1 tank, the Abrams fighting vehicle that have just been upgraded, but it's the same basic vehicle that started in 1982 because these guys have failed to do that. So now let's take a look at Hegseth. So Hegseth's coming in, and here's what he said in his opening statement. And interesting, the stuff you've seen on television, they're all talking about all kinds of peripheral issues. And I won't say that they're unimportant, because I think that is something that's valid to go into and examine in some of these cases. But what no one talked about is what the Secretary of Defense is supposed to do. And what is Hegseth going to do? So he said that he was brought in by Trump to be a change agent, by i.e., not doing what all the rest of the guys had done, which was basically keep the gravy train rolling for the Defense Department and all the contractors, those things that they have been good at. He said, that's not what I'm interested in. That's not what I want to do. He said he wants someone, this is what Hegseth said in his statement, that Trump wanted him to bring the warrior ethos back. And I can tell you, when I first joined the military in the mid 80s as a private, that was a thing back then. That was a big focus to the war fighting ethos. That you're a war fighter, and that means that you may have to suffer, and you may have to be deprived, and you have to work really hard because you have to defend our country, etc. The focus was on fighting and winning wars, fighting and winning battles. That's what the focus was. And since that time, it has diverted into all kinds of other things. 9/11 was, in the aftermath of 9/11, to be more specific, was one of the worst things because it diverted our attention away from war fighting and turned into nation building and winning hearts and minds and all that kind of stuff, which was always a peripheral issue. That became the main issue. And now all of a sudden it's just kind of waffled around what do we even stand for? So we need somebody to bring in a new focus on that. So I'm a fan of that if he can pull it off. He said he wanted him to be laser focused on warfighting, meritocracy, setting and holding to high standards, and making sure that our forces are ready to fight and capable should they be called upon. He said he wants to see he wants to see the Pentagon pass an audit. They have never, a lot of people don't know this. The Pentagon has never, and I mean literally never in its history, passed an audit. Every other department of the government has required to, by law, many years ago, to pass an audit. They all have, except the Department of Defense, and everybody just accepts it and it's like, whatever. So he's saying, no, we're actually going to pass an audit. He said that he's focused on defending the homeland, our borders, and our skies. And though that's a refreshing thing for the Department of Defense to finally focus on not fighting any of these unnecessary foreign wars, but on defending our own homeland, as is the name of the department. So if he can bring the focus back to what it's actually supposed to be, then good on him. He also said he wanted to end unnecessary deployments elsewhere. Hopefully that means Syria and probably dozens of others that are many people don't even know. We have somewhere around 700 bases in various places around the world. Most people don't have a clue where any of them are, and I bet 10% might actually be useful for American national security efforts. So I would like to see anything that's not directly tied to American national security and American interests end, so that we quit this absurd just spending money everywhere. Imagine how much it costs to keep those things alive, and the vast majority have nothing to do with their security. They're just there. And then one of the last things he said was that he wants to hold senior leaders accountable. If you perform, you get rewarded. If you don't perform, you get moved on. That's how it's supposed to work. It's called a meritocracy. And we have not seen that. I mean, I've shown you so many clips here of General David Petraeus, who failed as the leader in Afghanistan, the architect for the disaster. Was he held accountable? He was promoted. I personally observed several other generals during their time in Afghanistan utterly failed to accomplish the objectives, get promoted to the next star, get a big medal on their chest, go to work for the defense industry afterwards, making large numbers of dollars. That's what has happened so far. He says, no, we're going to stop that. We're going to hold people accountable. If you fail, then like any business, if the leader fails, he gets fired. He gets moved aside. He gets repositioned somewhere where he can be of benefit elsewhere. Everybody can't command. So, but if we don't hold anyone accountable, then there's no motivation to do anything other than just to be safe and do what the blob wants. That's the problem. So Hegseth never ran a large organization. He wasn't a general. He didn't work in the defense or even a civilian company. Okay, that's noteworthy. He'll surround himself, I'm sure, with people who have that kind of experience. And the Pentagon itself is this massive bureaucracy that's already existing. So it's not like he has to create this. All the systems to make these things function is already existing. What it needs is somebody at the top to direct it and give it leadership. And it remains to be seen whether Hegseth can do that. Right now, it's an aspiration. That's what he said he's going to do. Obviously, we've seen a lot of experience with people say plenty of things in confirmation hearing, and then they don't follow through with action. So the clock is ticking, and people are going to be watching to see, is he able to do what he said he's going to do. But I think that we actually need somebody who's broken from the chain that we've been bound by. All the people who are in the defense industry and all this other kind of stuff have done no good at all or terrible for our country. And it's time to give somebody a fresh look who, at least on paper, is saying the right things, because those are things that need to be done. The Defense Department does need to be modernized. It does need to have a new ethos. It does have to have a focus so that people even know what they're fighting for. That can help a lot of the recruiting efforts anyway. But we'll wait to see. But I think that the likelihood is that Hegseth will get confirmed, and probably next week. We'll have to see how that's going to go, and then, like everybody else, we'll see how he does, and we'll call balls and strikes. If he does what he said, we're gonna put it on there and say it. If he doesn't do what he said, we'll hold him accountable to that too, because that's what we do at Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth, no matter what it is. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.